this tailwinds of generative AI. And we've been preparing for that for 4 years, but we knew that it's coming. So we got prepared, and this tailwind is just helping us to move really, really fast.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of Great Things with Great Tech, the podcast highlighting companies doing great things with great technology. My name's Anthony Spiteri, and in this episode, we're exploring the transformative power of cognitive automation and generative AI in professional services, with a company that's been recognized as a Gartner Cool Vendor for its innovative integration of AI into legal, financial, insurance, and consulting industries. That company is Xero Systems, and I'm delighted to be speaking with co-founder and CEO Alex Babin. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you, Anthony. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So before we dive into another episode about AI, and I think a more exciting episode because we get to talk about applications in specific verticals and in business in general. If you love great things with great tech and would like to feature on future episodes, you can click on the link on the show notes or go to GTwGT.com to register your interest. Just as a reminder, all episodes of GTwGT are available on all good podcasting platforms, the Googles, the Apples, and the Spotifys, all hosted and distributed by Spotify Podcasts. Also, go to YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button, and you'll get all past and future episodes. And with that, Alex, let's talk about yourself firstly, where you've come from. You're sitting today in Silicon Valley, working in a great startup, but also in a great industry in the startup world in the area of AI. But before we talk about that, maybe give it a bit of background about yourself and how you came to found Xero Systems.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, that Xero Systems is my third startup. The first company was in the hardware space. It was a hybrid vehicle technology transmissions funded by DFJ, and we've been building transmission for hybrid vehicles. Then I decided that I will never go into hardware anymore because that's really, really hard. And we started a company in the computer vision AI space. And then came Xero Systems with my co-founder, Georg. And it's been quite a journey since then.
Yeah, so a little bit of background about yourself. Like, where did you get your start in computers, and also what led you to be interested in the AI space?
So I've been always more on the product side of things. So I really wanted to help people with a better products, and that's actually where the name Xero comes from. It's zero time wasted. Because literally a lot of software, a lot of products we have, they make us spend more time using them rather than reducing the time spent. And that what separates great products from bad products. If you look at Apple and compare it with other historical platforms, Apple products are amazingly well designed and easy to use, and that makes people use it effectively. So the same can be applied to other software products, but not every product is the same. And we do believe that the AI is the way to help people spend less time and produce more. And of course, in ideal world, the best interface is no interface. But the job is done. So in this case, well, when we started, myself and my co-founders, we looked at how people work and what they spend a lot of time on. We realized that AI that would support those knowledge workers and the most tedious, time-consuming, and laborious processes would be the good answer to those problems. And that's how we embarked on that journey.
So that in effect is almost your problem statement, right? In terms of trying to make things easier for people doing their work effectively in their job.
Correct.
So cognitive automation. So just to explain a little bit about what that actually is, because I think a lot of people listening to the podcast might not have a total grasp on what that means. So what is cognitive automation?
In order to start about talking about cognitive automation, we need to kind of separate it into two pieces, cognitive and automation. So everyone knows what automation is. Automation is when you produce more with less, like when processes are being done by a machine. But unfortunately, that concept sometimes, in many cases, cannot be applied to knowledge workers for a very particular reason. Every knowledge worker works differently. And if you try to apply one fit all concept to everyone, that's not going to work because change management is really hard thing to address. People don't like changing their processes. For example, you, Anthony, work with your emails differently than I do. And you do calendars differently or
Yeah.
reporting or whatever cognitive process you are involved in, it always different from other people, even if you work inside the same organization. So
Yeah.
that means that automation need to mimic the way you work, not
Okay.
to
Yep.
force you to change your processes. So that where comes cognitive automation, and that requires AI because in this case, you can't just fix it by the brute force. You need to apply cognitive component, which means AI.
And there's a cognitive component. You talked about the differences in people, right? In terms of how I do things, how you do things. So does that mean that the cognitive component of that can adapt to the person who's interfacing with the system?
It not just can, it should, because
It should.
otherwise it's not going to be the cognitive automation. And the systems that being built on top of large language models, which are taking the world by storm right now, is the beautiful example of cognitive component of it. Because when you work with those type of systems, they adapt to the way you want the information to be presented. They adapt to the questions you ask and so on and so forth, instead of forcing you to do things they've been designed to do.
Yeah. Is that the whole reinforcement model play as well? When you get reinforcement
Absolutely.
of the system and stuff, and it learns about yourself and then how to then interact with you better because it's reinforced learning.
Yes, it's reinforcement learning, human in the loop, reinforcement learning, because that's create a new data layer that never existed before. When you interact with AI system as a knowledge worker, as a knowledge producer, you basically create this data layer that being fed back into the model, into the system, and it learns from your behavior. In the future, well, even right now, it already can predict the next step
Yeah.
of what you're going to be doing. This is absolutely incredible. That's a piece of a big deep tech that we're also working on, the action transformers, when it doesn't just predict the next token in the or a sequence of tokens, but it actually can predict what next step you would do to accomplish the task. And that's also part of cognitive automation, proactive automation or insights. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I think actually, so I think back to one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time, Minority Report.
Oh,
I don't know if
love it.
you love,
Absolutely.
but those the guys that were predicting the murders were cogs, weren't they? They were cogs. It's for
Yeah.
cognitive. They were cognitive AIs basically predicting murder. Okay, that's just giving me chills in terms of that
We're so
movie.
far away from it, Anthony.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But in terms of just trying to marry a piece of sci-fi that was so brilliant but so farcical, but then we're talking about it in a way where, yeah, we're a long way away, but that's exactly what you're talking about. It's crazy
Exactly.
to think that we're stepping into this sort of world.
Yes. And it's on the scale that you describe it, it's far away, but actually it already produces a lot of results right now. And it doesn't have to be predicting the near future. It's enough to predict 2, 3, 5 steps in your process. For example, you are writing, you got an email with a request from someone to create a report. You didn't even open the email, but the AI agent that sits on your computer and works as your personal co-pilot knows what typical steps you are making to get that report, from what system you pull the data out, and how you compile it into the report. You open the email and AI says, hey, here is the report you've been requested. To you
Mm.
as a user, looks like black magic, but actually it's not, because all the steps, the action transformer can reconstruct those steps proactively and say, hey, here is the work I've done for you.
Yeah.
So that's
Actually,
the
real
key.
yeah, timing's amazing because I listen to I love the Lex Freeman podcast. He's amazing. And I listened to him interview Mark Zuckerberg a couple of weeks ago, but it was only recently I listened. And Mark was talking about the future of content creators, but also knowledge workers with that co-pilot, exactly as you're talking about it, right? So you Zero Systems is an example of bringing this to life pretty quickly, right? So it's
Oh,
actually
we're
pretty,
already
it's
building
actually
it.
yeah, there you go. It's for me. It's and I've had a couple of conversations about AI and where we're going. I think we'll get into the morals just a little bit
I would,
later on, but I
I
think,
would say more. I would say more. Actually, right now, at this moment, over 10,000 of our AI copilots already working alongside with humans.
wow, there you go. Okay. I think the key part about that, the part that shouldn't be scary for me from the, and even originally this conversation, the first 5 or 10 minutes, is that because of the cognitive part, it's kind of you, but it's just an extension of you. That is, so I think that's what people need to keep in their mind from a positivity point of view. This isn't taking over you, and we will talk about this a little bit later on. We're kind of foreshadowing, but the cognitive piece means it is almost an extension of you as a helper.
Think of it as a box of superpowers a knowledge worker can get. And one of the reasons we started the company, actually, it's really interesting. And it was back then when we're whiteboarding the mission, why we're doing this. And I still remember drawing two circles on the board. One circle we called what I like doing, and another circle is what I'm good at. And then we overlap them a bit, making sure like 30% of them overlapping. So in that middle where what I'm good at and I like doing it, this is a genius zone. That's where people are absolutely at their best. But
Yeah.
everything else on the side can and should be automated, can be
Okay.
done by AI.
Amazing. So just going back to the start, because we didn't fully flesh out the start of the company. Founded in about 2015, 16, and actually started with email categorization. That's kind of where you kicked it off. So it's an interesting
Um,
pivot. So just explain maybe that
um,
pivot.
not exactly the pivot. We started with the idea to build an algorithm. There is no large language model then. So we started building a
Mm-hmm.
model, our own model. There were like 4 or 5 people in literally a garage here in Silicon Valley.
Love
Um,
that.
and we started with the idea that what people are spending a lot of time on, reading long texts and basically sorting the information into different categories, right? So if we talk about email, well, that's what people do. They sort it into folders. If we talk about the long text, the best way to solve the problem, that time-consuming problem, is summarize it. That's what ChatGPT or other models doing perfectly right now. Back then in 2015, there were no models to do that. So we started
Mm.
training our own model. And we realized the best way to train it is to apply it to AI, to email management.
Yep.
That's how this
Ton of
kind of
data there.
concept of let's help people with email management was born. And we were helping users to basically automatically sort emails into categories and also summarize long emails into the form of a one paragraph. So they can make
TLDRs.
it exactly. And then when we started building it, it started evolving into more processes being automated, more models being built and trained. And then, of course, around 2020, we've got our first LLM built and trained, not as big as ChatGPT and not designed to do what ChatGPT does or GPT-4, but similar in concept. And that gave the birth of all other components that now we know as a AI engine Hercules, on top of which we build our AI applications.
Yeah, we'll talk about Hercules next, I think. But I wanted to. So interestingly, though, you've set up and focused on a particular vertical. Like, did you hit the legal sort of area first as a vertical to target? Did you do that on purpose, or just naturally
Yes.
happen because those guys are so unorganized?
Well, it's both. Well, they actually really well organized. And that's the purpose we wanted to help them with, because they were spending an enormous amount of time on actually doing that manually. It's called compliance in legal.
Mm.
Another reason we went into legal is that if we talk about knowledge workers, legal professionals, as well as accountant consultants, but legal professionals in the first place, they are probably the biggest producers of very structured content, and also
Yeah, fair call.
consuming a lot of
Yeah,
content. Like
agree.
reading a contract requires a lot of time, and the error level is really critical. So you can make mistakes because that might be critical for the client.
Yeah,
So we decided to go with the legal as a beachhead market. It's a beautiful market once you inside, and it's a terrible market when you try to win it over, because no one was actually brave and stupid enough at the same time like we were to actually try to, because law firms are notoriously known to be the most conservative uh, clients
yeah.
ever.
steeped
right?
in tradition, set in their ways, and also I think if you think about the automation part of that side of the argument, they almost are anti that. They want to protect the fact that they are very manual in their process. That's kind of how they I think that's
Um,
how they perceive value to the outside
you're
world
right.
potentially. Yeah.
You're right, but they wanna they are protective when it's related to practice of law. When
Mm.
they create the content that is legal focused, we never focus on practice of law. We help them with the business of law,
Business
email
of law. Yeah.
management, document management, timekeeping, all those processes that no one likes doing. I keep saying no lawyer went to law school to file emails into a content management system or a document
Mm.
management system. They want to help their clients. Instead, they are forced to spend 40% of their time doing monotonous work. No one likes doing it.
Yeah.
And that's what we help them with, as well as other industries like financial services, accounting, consulting, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I think that speaks to automation at its core, right? Like how do you get better at the actual crux of your job? In fact, that the circles that you talked about with the Venn diagram, how do you become more efficient in that middle portion? It's exactly what you've talked about there. So completely makes sense. All right. So you mentioned Hercules engine. Just give us a bit of an overview of that, what it is, how it works, and how you then interact with your customers for them to write applications with the
Mhm.
framework.
Yeah, to describe Hercules, which we've been building for 4 years, we need to look at the whole market as it is right now, especially the market of AI and generative AI. So I keep comparing it with brothers ride first flight type of a moment. We are in the air for like last 6, 8 months. We're in the air flying 300 yards, and the airplane is made out of dried wood, duct tape, and stuff. It's an amazing moment. Everyone understands that. But enterprise clients, and we talk about large enterprises, they don't need that type of a plane. They need Boeing 777,
Mm.
reliable, secure, with runway, and the cocktails should be served in the first class. That's what they expect from enterprise grade system. And here Hercules comes into life, because Hercules actually the framework and the engine and the building blocks to produce and build and deploy and run AI applications of the enterprise grade. It has all the guardrails and structured, unstructured data labeling and data source verification, and it all runs inside the security perimeter of the organization. So it
Okay.
has all the components, requires components like Lego blocks to create an AI application in under 8 weeks.
Okay.
And those AI applications, which is interesting, when I mention AI applications, people think it's like, oh, some app. Actually, AI application can be solving $1 billion problem. And I keep saying in the old world, even 2 years ago, each of those AI applications that can be created in under 8 weeks could have been $1 billion company on its own with
Mm-hmm.
as a SaaS, like software as a service, with millions of dollars invested and years spent to build it. Now it becomes mass model as a service running on top of Hercules,
Okay.
and it's a new world we're in, new brave
Yeah.
world of AI.
So you talked about the security boundaries, and that's very important. And the fact that this is one of the sort of points that comes up quite a bit with AI in terms of the security factor, the data that's going in, the data that, and then what it spits out. So do you deploy the Hercules framework per customer? So it's not a centralized model, basically. It's deployed into a customer perimeter, nice and secure, which means it's only got customer data in it.
Correct. And it's critical component for any enterprise. And of course, on-prem might be the private cloud, might be servers,
Yeah.
but that's essential and critical, because a lot of people saying, wait a second, we can still send some data outside. But if we talk about large enterprises like insurance, consulting, legal, financial services, sometimes it's not even the data of the customer. It's the data of their customers,
Yes.
other organizations, individuals, and so on and so forth. So they don't have rights to send it to third party for processing. It limits the whole ability of AI systems to actually work as we see them working for a consumer market. And security and privacy is pretty big concern. And one of the components of how we call it great AI chasm that our enterprise is stuck on one side of, and there is no effective way to cross over right now.
Yeah, and you think about the model like ChatGPT, which is obviously the most popular and well-known one at the moment. We really don't know where that data's come from. I mean, we've got an understanding of it. They've kept it quite quiet on the flip side from OpenAI's point of view. But clearly, at some point, the model data that they've pulled has been created by someone somewhere. You know what I mean? So the whole question of IP comes into play, and who owns the fragments of what's being produced, right? So in your case with Hercules, that doesn't come into play because it's so segmented and purpose built for the actual enterprise.
Correct. So the data that it's inside the security perimeter and is owned by the client or by its customers, but it's centralized. And the derivative actions or derivative models that have been fine-tuned, trained on this data belong to the client. So there are no issues, both on the security, privacy, or IP side. So it's a peace of mind for clients.
Yeah, so you're solving the privacy, the security of an AI model, and also, more importantly, ensuring the data security and compliance, and also regulation policies, which are pretty big in the worlds that you're playing in, right?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. So
That's a big challenge for organizations right now.
Yeah. So talk to me about a little bit of the pitfalls of, like, what are is there any negativity to, because I know there's a lot of say about these models coming out there, but in the way that you're deploying it and the way that you're framing it, I feel like you're solving a lot of the the negative connotations of these large language models that are open. But to your end, is there any pitfalls in the generative AI for enterprises?
Well, yes, there's so many of them, but let's focus on the three main things that actually of which this great AI chasm consists of. Number one, super obvious, data privacy concerns that we just discussed, right? Number two, the quality of the output. Models hallucinate. Models hallucinate. That's if you train a model on internet scale of data, you will get internet scale of biases and hallucinations. So, and let's imagine you are running the best bank in the world and using the state-of-the-art AI technologies with a 3% random chance of sending someone money to someone else.
Yeah.
You'll be running out of money and customers pretty quickly. Of course, in this example, I'm exaggerating, but there are so many examples where quality of AI output is so critical. We have a client who is processing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of transactions every month. Imagine the model hallucinate and instead of 10 million sends 100 million.
Yeah.
For the model, regular model, general model, it's nothing. It's a tiny bit of hallucination. For the regulated industries, might be catastrophic. So in this case, the AI output should be absolutely hallucination free. And we can talk about how it can be achieved and those components that are part of Hercules as well. And the third kind of a derivative problem is actually derivative from those two. Lack of AI applications, end-to-end applications. So enterprises are looking at this beautiful new world of possibilities. They're looking at this magic wand that they can wave, and a lot of processes never been able to solve before and automate before can be solved. But they understand that it can randomly turn, this magic wand can randomly turn gold into something else, right? Or bad things can happen. So it stops them and prevents them from adopting AI technologies at scale. And a lot of companies trying to dive into this by building those guardrails and support things, but it's still in infancy.
You're right. The biggest problem, the biggest problem that I've had when I'm interacting with the platforms that are out there is that at some point, the output that you get is not even somewhat related to what you've been talking about, and all of a sudden it just goes on a different tangent, pulls different data in, and you have to kind of, actually, I've said it to ChatGPT a couple of times. You're tripping, like something's gone really wrong here, and I feed it back and I go, "What's going on? Like you were on the right track, and now you've gone off. Like, get back on track, man. Like, I actually talk to it in that way to bring it back to what we were talking about. But that's okay for me because I'm just tinkering and having a bit of fun with the platform as it is. But you're right. If this is business, if we're talking about the
Yes.
livelihoods of people as well, but also money and all that emotive stuff, you want to
There,
make
there
sure
was a use
the guardrails are right.
there was a case a week or so ago when the lawyer used ChatGPT for the brief to submit the brief into the court. And he asked ChatGPT about some use cases, like previous cases, and ChatGPT completely made cases up. And it's so convincing. It's called a convincing bullshit. So ChatGPT is convincing bullshitter. Convinced the lawyer, and the lawyer asked, are those, he was suspicious. He said, are those real? That's the human nature. The person suspected, the lawyer
Yep.
suspected that the use cases are made up. Asked ChatGPT, are they real? And ChatGPT said, they absolutely real, trust me.
Yeah.
And the lawyer submitted it to the court, and the judge caught him, and it was a big shitstorm. And
Yeah.
the lawyer
I
was
can imagine.
fined and
I think I
suspended or
read that
whatever.
one. Yeah.
It's
Effectively, he wasn't looking for automation. He was looking for shortcuts.
data. Yes, he was trying actually automation. He wanted to not to
Automating
spend
the
time on
process.
searching for the cases precedents. He wanted to get the distilled knowledge, so he doesn't have to spend time on doing his own research. And he
Yeah.
trusted AI, consumer grade AI, for the business use case where potentially millions of dollars might have been involved,
Yep.
and put
Or
his
someone's
client
life. Or
or
someone's
someone's
life.
life. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
So
that's how critical.
How does Hercules, you mentioned how Hercules kind of protects against that, the guardrails that are in place, how it interacts with the applications that are tapping into it. So very quickly, like, how do you guys circumvent that potential issue?
There are many components that play into that, like components of Hercules play into field. I'll just highlight two.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, ground source data. So ground truth. Because when you work with the like model works with the corporate data that's literally owned by the customer, you can always trace to the source of the data. So models have less options to hallucinate. They can make things up. And the second component is a human in the loop. If you build the human and computer and like an AI interaction the right way, so in between steps, human oversees what AI is doing, it also very dramatically reduces the level of the hallucination or wrong output. And there are many other components,
Mm-hmm.
but those two play the critical role.
Okay, that's all. That's interesting, and I think that's what separates what you said, a consumer model from an enterprise model, effectively. And I think in all areas of software, over the years, that's what differentiates consumer, open source, enterprise. It's always the way. There's little bits that make it more tangible for the customer to stop bad things from happening, or from a point of view of support or bugs or whatever it might be. So here's a question: like we talked about, just out in the open world, AI is obviously there. There was a survey from Salesforce on generative AI released this week or last week, and you had some interesting takeaways from that. Did you just want to talk a little bit about your takeaways from that particular survey? And I will link to the survey in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it taps back into what we just discussed perfectly, because the survey it has many interesting points there, but one I wanted to highlight specifically. So they surveyed, and it was phrased the way, how much you trust the AI to
Mm-hmm.
provide the data security and right outputs or something like this. I'm rephrasing it. So,
Yeah.
and they interviewed a bunch of people starting from C-suite, going down to management level, like low level management, and in between there were senior directors, IT people, and so on and so forth. So you would be surprised, but higher people in the rank, typically less technical savvy they are, more they trust AI. Down the ladder you go, specifically the people in the ground, in the trenches, who has the responsibility to implement AI, they
Yep.
trust less and less. So the numbers are eye-watering. So the C-suite, 83% of C-suite people trust AI with this data security and privacy and all that stuff. They might not even know how deep the rabbit hole is. And down you go at the kind of in the trenches, it's 29%.
Yeah.
So it's like 3 times difference.
I've got a
Incredible.
theory on that, right? Like, I think if I parallel that to the public cloud and how enterprises were shifting from on premises to public cloud, if you look at where the push came from the C suite. And they just
Mm-hmm.
said, just do it because I've heard it's good. I've heard it's the future. Let's do it. And then the guys on the ground, they had to implement the change and do the migrations and manage applications as they shifted from on-prem to the cloud. They're the ones that were left with all the craziness. And then all of a sudden it was costing too much. It wasn't performing. And the C-suites would go and say, but we thought this was going to be like the future. And that's
And
not the
now they're
case
telling
today.
go back to prem, like go back to the head.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a back migration right now happening.
Yeah. So the repatriation, but I think it's kind of the same thing, right? Where and not to diminish obviously what the C suites are doing, but the people that are making the decisions at the top typically are the ones that proliferate that down the chain, no matter what, and they just give the go ahead for it. So this is the same thing happening now. You're saying.
Absolutely. And that's interesting because this new technologies like GPT-4 API and other systems, you can actually use them pretty effectively to prototype things. And when you prototype, you see what is art of the possible. You see this magic wand
Yeah.
available. Then C-suite say, well, it's good enough. Now let's implement it. And then CISOs and IT directors and CIOs look at this saying, wait a second, we can't do that because we'll be exposed to so much risk. And then that they come to us saying, well, we know that it's possible. Now, can we do the same, replicate the same inside the security perimeter? And those are large insurance companies, banks, regulators, law firms. And that plays really well into our strategy because we tell them, hey, what you just saw possible now can be done and replicated effectively at edge inside your security perimeter.
Yeah. Pivoting a little bit to a question around how you guys do it, and I think this is very interesting. You've got a partnership or a sort of news article coming out with Intel about how you're leveraging CPUs instead of GPUs for this large language model platform or engine. That's amazing because all this time I'm sitting here going, there's a reason why the NVIDIA stock price has gone through the roof.
Well, and they have reasons because it's all powered by GPUs and model training is still requires GPUs. But running the model and sometimes smaller models at edge doesn't have to be on GPU. You don't have to spend an enormous amount of money on that. So CPUs is the way to, and that's why we got the cool vendor from Gartner because we do data processing and the model running on CPUs utilizing the same infrastructure organizations already have. So
Wow.
instead
Okay.
of running it in Azure or AWS and paying them millions of dollars, you can effectively run it there using CPUs or even inside your security perimeter on-prem using CPUs. And yes, there is a case study with Intel and Zero coming live. It's not yet live, but it's probably in a couple of days. So I'll send you the link. You can put it in notes for the podcast. It's a case study of how Zero utilized, and some of our partners utilized the power of CPU processing and this methodology that we developed to run on Intel CPUs for one of the clients and how much cost saving it produced for the client. Now multiply it by the scale at which enterprises want to apply AI to every corner of their business, every business line. In the future, like literally close future, it's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars of saving for those large organizations because running AI applications is very expensive if you spend it on GPUs.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really good feather in the cap and a great value add and for Zero Systems. I just want to finish off. We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about this concept of closed versus open source models and what that means for the industry and in the democratization of these LLMs. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the open source industry or part of the market will win over time. They have less resources, but in terms of the money, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Meta, they can spend billions of
Mm-hmm.
dollars. What they don't have, though, billions of dollars is not equivalent of people's brains. So they can spend it on compute, they can spend it on other things, but hundreds of thousands of people who involved in open source can produce things faster, and they can also iterate faster. And I would say in the long run, open source will win, and the flexibility of those models, ability to run on edge and on small devices. We've already seen models running on Raspberry Pi and even iPhones.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's going to be improving dramatically. And that's this happening because this part of the market, the open source community, they have scarce resources. They don't have billions of dollars to spend on ineffective systems. So OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, they are kind of they have too much resources. That's why they're not innovating in the right way.
Can I say as well, like, I think it's the question of trust as well. If you have a closed system like this, and we've talked about this through the episode, and we've answered a lot of the questions around whether it's going to replace knowledge workers, what it means for efficiency, the cognitive space, but effectively, and we talked about the C-suites, and you need trust. And if a system is that's a more general system is closed, that's not open source, and I think the trust factor is always going to be questioned. That's at that big level, right? And people don't trust big tech as it is. Right?
They have reasons. There are reasons not to, right?
Absolutely, right? So I think that's an interesting question. I think, from a security point of view, from the point of view of finding bugs, there's a plus and minus conversation there to have. But yeah.
There's one aspect actually, and a great example of why open source might be more effective and why closed systems are not scalable, or not actually scalable, but they are not flexible enough. I'll bring up example when AI system needs to be hooked into legacy system through API, right? So what is happening right now? Like when you send the prompt to a large language model, let's say GPT-4, it gives you the output, but you don't know how model evolves. And if you send one prompt today, it doesn't mean the same prompt will give you the same result tomorrow.
In fact, it doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can't build the sustainable and dependable system when you don't know what next time it's going to produce. Unlike API, for example, when you send a request to legacy system and you get exactly the same output, it's predictable. So with open source models, when you know why the system gives you that reply, it's much more dependable. With a closed source model, you have no idea what it will return tomorrow. And you can't build the predictable systems based on that.
Great answer. Great answer. Hey, just want to finish off in under a minute. Talk a little bit about where Xero Systems goes from here. Like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys looking to innovate and continue to disrupt the market in this amazing space, which is just starting to take off?
You're absolutely right. There's tailwinds of generative AI, and we've been preparing for that for 4 years. We didn't know how big that would be. We didn't anticipate it to be that big, but we knew that it's coming. So we got prepared, and this tailwind is just helping us to move really, really fast. And when the tide goes up, all the boats are lifted. And in this case, we see the whole market evolving, and more open source models, more solutions like LangChain and others appear. We absorb them into Hercules as our engine, and of course, adding our own capabilities, and we're delivering it to enterprise clients. So that whole movement is actually benefiting us incredibly well. And we want to have more and more so enterprises can get better apps faster and solve problems that never been solved before.
Amazing. Hey, great conversation. I really love what you guys are doing. I love the way that you've just described, and we hit all the points that we wanted to hit in the episode about, the impact of AI, this generative world that's coming up, how it impacts workers, but also the benefits. And the biggest thing about not being scared, but I think what I really loved was the Venn diagram and getting people to be better at what they're best at, which I love. And that's just all about moving forward. So, hey, thanks for being on the show, Alex. If just as a final reminder, if you're not subscribed to the show and you would like to hear from 4 episodes, you can subscribe to the podcast on GTwGT.com or head to the YouTube channel or any podcast platform. So with that, this has been episode 67. Thank you to Alex and Xero Systems, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.